This is one of the toughest workshops for me to do. And so I'm awfully glad that we started a couple of years ago to have a collaboration with our colleagues in the Writing Center to help us with coordinating both the personal statement workshop, which we're doing today, and then next Wednesday, we're going to be following it up with an in-person Write Night, which the details about are already posted on the ELMS course and on the website, and which Becca can put in the chat, the details of and how to register for it. But I'm really, really happy to have Tom Earls and Dr. Valievicharska with me from the Writing Center to talk you through what we think are some good tips for writing the personal statement. And a wonderful colleague of mine a few years ago who was on the medical school admissions side said, it's so much easier to tell people what's not good than what is good, but we're still going to try to leave you with some pearls of wisdom today. And I think we've got some good stuff lined up for you. Courtney is here in the chat, so if you have questions you think she might be able to answer, she'll be answering them. But she'll also push them out to us periodically if you're asking questions that we should answer live. So go ahead and use the chat as you need. So just to start off, I have a couple of slides just to get us started, and then I will gratefully turn it over to my colleagues to take you through some of their tips on writing the personal statement. But I mean, just as a way of starting to think about this, you don't have that many opportunities in your primary application to distinguish yourself from other applicants. Outstanding metrics are fairly much the norm. People have experiences that look similar, but the personal statement is really an opportunity for you to speak directly to the admissions committees in your own voice, on your own terms, and to really help them understand what is your motivation for the profession. What have you done to test that? What kinds of experiences are you going to talk about that are going to help you explain to them and that you've developed some understanding of the profession, and how you're maybe going to help them understand what your basic competencies and capacity to be successful. And we wrote medical school here, but also, of course, dental school and any other professional school that you're applying to. So you're going to do a lot of writing. This is one of the many things that you'll be writing in the next several months. And we talk about this idea of front loading your application with some of the writing that you're going to need to do this summer so that you get some ideas on paper and you're ready so that it's not too overwhelming when it's time to write your applications in June. So all of the writing starts with the pre-health packet and the self-reflections, as you know, that's due on February 15th. And the reflections that you write through, the 20 or so reflection prompts can become the basis of your personal statement, and probably will to some extent. So sometimes I hear from you that you're trying to figure out, is it okay, if I write my motivation, that answer to 4A on the self-reflections, can I grab that and make that part of my personal statement? And the answer is, of course, that's your motivation statement. And it's very likely that you're going to use some of the same language. Your first draft of the personal statement is due with the pre-health packet on February 15th. But of course, you'll have months from that date to continue to refine it and make it better based on feedback that you get from us or others, or just new ideas that you generate as you go forward in the next few months. You don't have to have that finalized until you turn in your common applications. And again, as I said, that most of them will be opening up and going live end of May or June. So you'll keep working on those, you'll keep getting feedback. We will give you feedback on your personal statement one time when you turn in the pre-health packet. And that will be part of the written response that you get from us when we grade your ELMS course. And then unfortunately we'll have 500 to read, so we can't come back over and over again to your personal statement. But that is one great value of this collaboration with the Writing Center. You always can take our feedback, bring it to the Writing Center tutors, and see if they can help push you a little bit in the directions that we're suggesting. And the other piece is the secondary and supplemental essays. So after you turn in your Common Application, most schools will have a set of essays that they will share with you to help them understand why specifically you're applying to that program. And so they're trying to get at things that are particularly important based on the values and the culture of that institution. So school specific and mission driven. And when we say school specific, I mean, you really want to, if you're trying to put an answer together about why you're applying a case or why you're applying to Maryland or why you're applying to, any medical school or dental school, you want to investigate that school, go to their website, understand, what they think is unique and reference it throughout your application. We've heard from colleagues sometimes on the medical school and dental school side that one of the things that they scan for is how often you actually reference the school name in the application. Do you know that you're applying specifically to the school? Why are you applying to it, and why does it matter to you? I shared with you through the ELMS course a couple of hours ago a link to an article that I particularly like. For one, it's short and easy to digest. The author makes a couple of really succinct points that I think are incredibly helpful to get you starting to think about how to go from good to great with your personal statement. So a more generic personal statement might talk about qualities, qualities that you think physicians have. Now, don't forget, physicians and dentists know the qualities of good physicians. They hopefully are good physicians or dentists. So to repeat to them, I think, that a good physician is X, Y, and Z doesn't push this conversation very far. Extolling the virtues of service, identifying humanism in others. So focusing, sort of on things that you think are characteristics without explaining a little bit more about why you think they're important or how you've come to understand them a little bit better. I know that you hear the phrase show, don't tell. And I just want to push you a little bit on that, because I've seen some essays and people who've provided feedback that they think that showing means providing some sort of a description of a physical space, or, a moment where you walked into a particular setting and what that smelled like or sounded like. And if you spend a lot of time on descriptions, that can become very generic. Like I could write that and never have been in that space just because I'm a reader and I know, how to make a description of a space. They're not that different one from the other. So the show, don't tell isn't really about describing a space. It's really about using the language of the profession, using terminology that really shows that you get it. So to go to great, it should, you worry sometimes, I think, about standing out and being unique. And the answer is that it doesn't have to be earth shattering, but it's unique to you. And that's what makes it unique. So it's not interchangeable with anybody else's experience. And it shows that you're able to grow through beliefs and motivations. This is a big pitfall. You don't want to sort of fade to the most obvious ways of talking about an experience by saying, what you brought to it, or the fact, you being there made it different, that you felt good when you were serving or holding the hand of a patient. Because what we want to push you toward is a little bit more of an understanding of why that patient may have needed their hand held. What was going on for them in the moment, what was going on for their family in the moment. So that's, not about you, but about you recognizing and understanding the humanity of the people that you're working with. When you sort of stop short with, I want to help people, I'm here because I want to help people, that doesn't push as far as me. I mean, a lot of us help people. I help people in my daily work. A lot of people that you know help people in your daily work. But what's different about physicians and dentists is, building that knowledge and expertise that differentiates you from any, in the preclinical setting, in the clinical setting, you become prepared, you become competent. What does that feel like? In your residency, you choose something that you're going to become an expert in. What does that, what have you seen that, how does that translate when you're observing people, and what do they do that's different, that changes the experience for people when they show that competence, alongside also having, showing care and compassion. And above all, I think, and I'll end with this and turn it over to my colleagues. You want them to see your intelligence, your tenacity, your grit, your power of observation through the language that you use, your ability to work in teams, things that are competencies that matter in the health professions. Without listing them, show that you have them, show that you recognize that those are qualities that matter. And I'll leave it there for now. I'll turn it over to my colleagues. And Tom, I think you're first, right? And you're a co-host. I don't know if that means you can change the slides, though. I don't think so. I think you're just going to have to kind of prompt me. So
Okay.
I'm happy to just be prompted.
All right. Thank you. Thanks very much. All right. So starting any piece of writing can be difficult, right? And some of us have a great deal of anxiety when we have to start something, or we feel like it needs to be perfect, or we need to start getting it right the minute our fingers hit the keys of the keyboard. That's not true, but it still takes time for some of us to divorce ourselves from those feelings. But starting early and treating it as a process can really help you overcome some of that anxiety or some of those doubts. And two low stakes steps you can take in starting this process is to take a look at the school website. And the other one is to brainstorm. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
All right. So as Wendy was saying, you make this very specific to the school that you're applying to, and you can really learn a lot just by looking at the school's webpage. So read the admissions webpage, notice links to find information for new students, pay attention to information that's repeated or bolded. It's probably important. If they're repeating information, it means that they want you to pay attention to that. And that's likely something you might touch on in your personal statement, or something you might try to frame some of your own qualities around. Next slide, please. I think you might be on, I'm sorry, I don't know if this is the one I updated.
Is it?
Yeah. Would I
not?
be able to just?
It's not.
No.
Do you have can you maybe share the one that I can stop sharing and you can take over with the sharing?
Great.
Okay, because this is the one that I have. All right, there we go.
Okay. Sorry. I guess we can deal with it that way. All right, images and information that are repeated in bold, and language use. Is it formal or conversational, or is it a balance? That might give you a hint as to what type of language you should use. You don't want to sound too formal if they're not formal, but if you sound too conversational, a little too informal, it might not seem appropriate that way either. So then brainstorming. And brainstorming simply means generating ideas, just getting all the ideas together you can. Again, this is a very low stakes early step that you can take, but brainstorming can look different for everyone. It might mean just making lists, charting, free writing things out without any rules, talking with people. And that could mean an invested listener like your advisor or your friends or faculty in your department, strangers on the metro, people in line at Chick-fil-A, anyone you might corner and get to listen to you. And just think about the things that set you apart. Again, you want this to be individual to you, this specific to you, something that no one else could write. So think about your work experience, your internship experience, career goals, any unique skills you might have that are somehow relevant to attending medical or dental school, overcoming unusual obstacles, special talents, again, that are relevant, community service, family background. Everyone has a story. And you might not write about all of these things. You're probably not going to choose to write about any of these things, maybe, but these are ideas that can get you started, get the ball rolling on this. And when you're writing, you should expect it to be a lengthy process. This is not the type of thing you want to write the night before or even the week before it's due, right? You know that you're spending weeks on this, maybe months. Plan on multiple drafts. Drafts might look different from person to person. That might mean several kind of distinct drafts where this is draft 1, this is draft 2, this is draft 3, or it might be kind of a rolling draft that you constantly go through and edit, maybe in a Google Doc that you can go back to and look at changes, but expect it to change often and be willing to make those changes as well. It's not written in stone, and the first thing you wrote doesn't have to be the thing you stick with. And then some teamwork. Build a group of trusted, respected readers who can offer honest, productive suggestions. And those readers should be people who know the field, advisors, faculty, but maybe also friends who aren't really in the field, but know you and can speak to things about you that maybe your advisors and your teachers don't necessarily know. This document is going to be audience driven. So the entire application is audience driven. So it's about you, but you're not writing about yourself for yourself. You're writing it for an audience. And as with any piece of writing, you really need to think about who your audience is and what the context is that they'll be reading your application. For better or worse, they're going to be reading it within a bunch of other applications. And sometimes they're going to be looking for any reason to put you in the no pile, right? Don't give them reasons right away to put you in the no pile. Don't just try to be the ideal candidate. Don't write what everyone else is going to write. Don't write the things you think they want to hear, because guess what? 80% or more are writing that. So you want to be the person that stands out. You also want to be very careful that you don't offend people. You don't want to do anything to rub them the wrong way, because it could be right before lunch and they're cranky and they're in a hurry to get to lunch, and you might easily go into the no pile that way. And there are individuals who understand education and health and medicine from a range of perspectives, maybe not necessarily in the field that you're going to be exploring. So it might be clinical, teaching, research faculty, admissions officers, current health profession students, some schools do that, alumni from the program, or community members. Keep all of those in mind as potential members of your audience. And then write to their values. Based on their situation, what would they esteem in an application or an applicant? Think about that. The pieces, the parts of your essay, parts of your entire package should work together for synergy. You want to put forth the best impression of you, the best description of your work, and the qualities that make you you and make you a good applicant for this program. So make sure the parts complement and support each other. It's really important that if, for the different parts of your application, though, don't repeat or just rehash things that appear in another part, because that's a wasted opportunity. And keep in mind, you may be asked to discuss the content in an interview, if there is an interview, and anything you put in any of these parts of your application is fair game that they can ask you about. So if you seem dishonest, or if you're unable to speak to anything that appeared in your personal statement or any other part of your application, you might seem dishonest, or maybe it seems like you let someone else write parts of it. So the personal statement should communicate an easy to remember picture of a unique, qualified future professional. You want to stand out, but in good ways, of course. Present your experiences in ways that show reflection and growth. Those are two really important things to keep in mind for any personal statement for just about any program, job, internship. Reflection and growth, looking back at what you've done, at who you've become, at what your experiences have taught you, how your values have been shaped, how your beliefs have formed. And of course, going into medical school, it's caring for others, right? Working with patients. How do your particular experiences and character qualities make you better suited than someone else who might be applying? And don't forget to talk about working with patients. Choose your character qualities. What are your best traits? Ask several friends and a few family members. And don't be too quick to dismiss the things that they mention. Write it down, keep it in mind. Things that might seem inappropriate or maybe ridiculous or just irrelevant at the time, in a few days, a light bulb might go off and you think, wow, no, that's something I can really explore. That's something that really makes me stand out. So, especially if you're still able to do this in the brainstorming stage, don't be too quick to dismiss anything, especially if these are things that several people in your life speak to. And you don't have to highlight all the same traits as everyone else. Again, you want to stand out in good ways. Diligence or attention to detail are great qualities to add to things like empathy, optimism, or compassion. And also, what are the traits you would want in your doctor? This seems so obvious, but it's something I think a lot of us might overlook. What would you want in your doctor? What would you want in someone caring for a family member? And what would inspire confidence in them? So the qualities the best doctors have in common is the list we got from, I think, St. George's University. And as Wendy said, these aren't things you just want to discuss or show the reader that you understand, but these are things that you can keep in mind and show about yourself, right? Good doctors are good communicators, organized and conscientious, make patients feel cared for, they're curious, they work together to support patients, they're advocates for their patients, they have great bedside manner. So maybe without outright stating those things, can you show that you have those qualities in the stories that you tell or in the experiences that you share? Collect the stories of a unique individual. You are a unique individual. And to set your essay apart almost immediately, think about starting out with a personal or non-clinical experience that can tell something memorable about your unique background or interest that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with medicine. If you can tie it to and connect it to medicine and your pursuit, medical school or dental school, that is what you really want to do. But starting out with an experience like this can help you stand out, especially if you can connect it. But then follow it up quickly with a clinical or research experience to try to demonstrate your acquisition of or your work with these qualities. Maybe what led you to medicine. And a chronology might help keep it clear in your own mind and then in the readers, of course. So discuss why you pursued a particular experience, how you felt during the experience. And this is what we mean when we say, show, don't tell, but not get into some of those details of space that Wendy mentioned, maybe stay away from, right? You don't want to talk about as I walk down the hall, but what effect did this experience have on you? What did it show you or teach you about yourself? What did you accomplish or learn? How it affected you and others? How it influenced your decision to pursue medicine? And it should make sense. It shouldn't be something that, I don't know, driving in your car at night, suddenly it dawned on you, you should attend medical school. That's not really going to convince anyone that you're a strong candidate. So a couple of rhetorical strategies you might use in your storytelling: present yourself as likable and relatable, but you don't want to seem perfect. You want to seem teachable. If you seem unteachable, these faculty members probably aren't going to want to work with you. Use experiences with feelings that others can relate to and describe your complex thoughts and feelings during the experience. And engaging in reflection and showing growth, I think, is one way to show that you're teachable, that you're someone who looks back on things and questions or challenges what you did in the moment or what you felt in that moment or where you've gotten to since then. Choose individualized stories, something nobody else could write. And then concluding can be a very difficult thing to do in any piece of writing, right? My students in English 101 or something, I already wrote the paper, now you expect me to conclude the paper. This is where you can state your qualities more directly. Maybe you've already shown, now you can kind of just state them. But again, this might be an opportunity to reflect on growth. This might be an appropriate place to do that, to firmly express your dedication to contribute to the health and care of your patients. Present an energetic look toward the future. Leave your reader wanting your unique story of growth to continue. Maybe they would want to read more or yes, you're the type of person they want to work with. They want to hear more about what you've done or what you hope to do. And I think that's where I stop. So I'll stop sharing.
Before we, Dr. Valia-Vicharska, do you have slides too, right? Or no slides?
No, actually, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I put all the documents that I'd like to discuss on a Google Drive. So hopefully Becca can share them with everyone in the chat.
Okay, so while Becca's dropping that into the chat so that you all can open it, Courtney, are there any questions in the chat that you think that we could answer before we move on?
I answered a question in the chat, but I think it'd be good for everyone to just hear out loud. It's kind of the repetitiveness that's going to occur in your application and managing the repetitiveness. And so, Wendy, perhaps this is a question for you. As students are completing their primary applications, secondaries, personal statement, all their written materials, is it okay that they're repeating themselves, because they will likely feel like they're just kind of moving in this circle of experiences? So talk a little bit about how students can unveil their experiences to schools while trying not to be too repetitive.
One thing that I would caution you about is avoiding the temptation to just sort of dump everything you've ever done into your personal statement. So, and I think, you know, focusing, it's 5,300 characters, it's 4,500 characters for dental school. That's not a lot of characters. So remember and rely on the fact that you have all of your activities section that have characters, and that you should actually take time to fully describe your activities in your application itself. Your personal statement does not need to be a huge data dump of everything you've ever done. So you're going to zero in on maybe a few things that really allow you to highlight what you've decided is your motivation theme. So that might help you with the repetitiveness. I read an essay today that was just one paragraph after another of a new experience. And each paragraph by itself was well written and crafted, but they didn't come together very well, and they wound up being just a collection of experiences rather than something that helped me understand this particular student's motivation. So that was the feedback that I gave them today. You know, your segues aren't really good. We're jumping from one idea to the next, and there's no overarching theme. There's just a lot of material here. So I think just like try to avoid the temptation to throw everything you've done in, and figure out what to include in your personal statement that's relative or relevant to the motivation story that you're trying to tell.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
What should the tone of the personal statement be? Like, is it more like you're talking to a friend, a colleague, or are you promoting yourself like you're in an interview?
Well, I think as Tom said, I mean, it needs to be formal enough, right? So you're not talking to a buddy. It is more an argument piece than a creative writing piece. I think that's probably what Dr. It might be a good segue to Dr. Valia-Vicharska's part of the conversation. But that might be a good thing to sort of keep in your mind. This is not creative writing, and it is fundamentally different. And I think that's where we're going next with this. I wanted to say one thing to highlight a couple of things that Tom mentioned before I forget them. And one of them, he made a really good point about remembering who your audience is. Courtney and I see so often that one of the major motivators is that you have had a bad experience, or a family member has had a bad experience in medicine or dentistry, and so you want to go and fix the profession. And I promise you that is going to land like a lead balloon. And you really have to think in terms of the fact that, you know, you are going to be in the most humbling profession of maybe any of us. And when you make mistakes, they have big consequences and you will make them. So I think that, leaving out any sort of judgment about the professionals who've trained for this profession for many, many years, and you have not yet trained for it for a single day, is really good advice. So I would steer clear of that message. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned before I forget about it is the other thing that Tom mentioned is really alignment between your motivation story and your resume. So if your motivation story is that you want to go and take care of, that you're really interested in women's health, and, that's where you want to spend your time. And then they look at your resume because you've made a declaration and see absolutely no evidence of any work ever with women, then they are going to be confused. So alignment with your experiences is something they look for. And then that was it. I'll have more to say later, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Valia-Vicharska for the next part.
That was great advice. And I just want to, again, say that the personal essay is not a reiteration of your resume, it's not, an expanded resume, an expanded version of the resume. It's an opportunity to highlight your own personal characteristics and how your personal experience can highlight those personal characteristics. So it's an opportunity to connect the dots for your audience and to explain why, or suggest rather, why you would become a good doctor. So do you have access to the Google Drive where I uploaded several examples of successful personal statements that would help illustrate several different ways in which other students have made the case for themselves. So we're going to take a look at the ways in which they present their own personal experience and how they frame it. And you'll see that each one of those statements zeroes in on maybe one or two characteristics, and then backs those characteristics with personal experience. So they're all on PDF file, and the files are annotated, so make sure that you can see the notes. Let's start with file number 3A. That's the statement by Christina Ahn. I'll wait a couple of moments so that you can you have time to access it. Okay, great. Oh, thanks very much. Okay, that's one that where Christina has highlighted her grit in the face of failure, which then leads to humility. And I'm just going to read out a couple of paragraphs and then comment on them. The first paragraph, it was the busiest time of senior year when the director of Stanford Latter-day Saints production of Fiddler on the Roof approached me about potentially conducting the pit orchestra. Although I was swamped already, I decided to conduct because I knew I would regret it if I didn't try. Conducting was amazing. I distinctly remember the feeling of the dark wood of the baton in my hand and tracing out patterns in the mirror to practice the movements. I remember changing tempos incorrectly and laughing with the rest of the orchestra as we ended in cacophony. And I remember the darkened hush of the full auditorium at the start of each performance as a lone violin played a lilting melody at my command. The next paragraph, I knew I would regret it if I didn't try. And so what Christina's doing here, I'm going to pause for a second. What she's doing here is sharing a humbling story of personal failure. It's not related to any medical experience. She worked hard to practice. She made a mistake. The performance ended in cacophony, but nonetheless, she found the strength to laugh together with the other musicians and to continue. And then the second paragraph, she begins on that conclusion, that personal quality. I knew I would regret it if I didn't try. And it provides a nice transition that helps to frame that first paragraph and tells the reader what to expect in the next paragraph also. So these words not only described my decision to conduct, but also my journey to realizing that I wanted to become a doctor. Okay, I'm going to skip down to the third paragraph. Then my advisor brought up the possibility of going to Haiti. At first, I thought she was out of her mind, but after several months of debating, I knew volunteering there was the perfect opportunity to get clinical experience while helping others. And so that's an excellent arrangement because it comes in chronological order. It's not confusing, and it helps the reader to follow the events in her life and to kind of, it helps the reader to like form the idea of what she is like and what the most important qualities of her character are. And then the final paragraph, I also realized in Haiti the energy demands of physicians when I volunteered at Mother Teresa's clinic for young children and babies, etc. And so this paragraph and the next tell us how she found her humility, and that newfound humility broadened her love of others and helped her to, it also connects with that previous experience of personal failure where she learns humility and is looking forward to her anticipation of becoming a doctor. And at this point, she realizes that she can only make a small difference in a world full of suffering, and yet she's still willing to try. And so that's the kind of thing that medical professionals will be looking for. One or two personal qualities, things that show that the applicant is willing to serve, the applicant will relate to the patients with compassion, and the applicant is teachable. The next statement is by George Issa. That's number 4A. I still remember her name, Danielle. She was 8 years old and had been sexually assaulted by her neighbor. Talking to a child about his or her sexual abuse was one of the most difficult experiences I've gone through, but it was my job when I volunteered at the Gwinnett Sexual Assault Center. Listening to Danielle tell me about her experience was heartbreaking. I vividly remember the details of her horrific incident and the pain she suffered. Yet despite her ordeal, she once told me, "It's not my fault and that I'm still a good person. I just want to grow up and not let this happen to others." At this moment, I realized that this 8-year-old girl had more courage, confidence, and wisdom than I could only hope to have someday. Okay, and so this is an example of how witnessing somebody else's trauma and suffering, and that's the applicant's personal experience, the experience of witnessing it, leads to the resolve to alleviate suffering. But maybe not everybody has all that experience. Nonetheless, if you do have it, it's and it's made a difference in your life, it's a good thing to highlight. And then the next paragraph says openly, "This desire has led me here to Athens Regional Hospital, where I'm waiting my turn to apply for a student volunteer position." So it's a nice transition, provides a chronological marker between previous experience and the present moment, and points to resolve and development and shows growth, which are all things that Wendy and Tom talked about. Let's take a look at the next example, which is by Kaylin Johnson, number 5A. So this is an interesting statement in that it demonstrates a successful applicant who does not necessarily have a single memorable story. So the previous ones did, but this one doesn't. But it demonstrates the desire to learn. My inspiration to pursue medicine came from an aunt who completed an MD PhD when I was in grade school. She visited us often and spent hours describing the remarkable things she learned. Now, as a retinal surgeon and mother of 4, she illustrates the joys and challenges of balancing a family with practicing medicine. As an adult, I see her path as something for which numerous experiences in my life have prepared me: academic, cultural, work and family related, and others. I put a lot of thought into pursuing medicine, and I'm extremely motivated to become a physician. The field of medicine integrates many of my academic and personal interests, such as human biology, anthropology, and helping people understand and address issues regarding health and living. And so, again, she doesn't have a single memorable personal story, and that's fine. But again, she demonstrates her motivation, her suitability by conveying her desire to learn. Let's take a look at number 6A, which is by Bashir Hakim. Okay, this is another interesting, a different personal statement in that it deploys an extended comparison, which is a tricky thing. And Wendy, maybe you could comment on the use of comparisons as well. But let's take a look at this one, and then we'll talk about it. So the comparison here is between football and the medical profession. The game of football is a game of struggle, a battle of wills and grit unlike any other. It's a game of constant ups and downs, anxiety and excitement. Yet the 48 minutes spent playing the game is only a fraction of what decides the outcome. It's the constant struggle off the field, in the weight room, in the film room, analyzing previous games to identify shortcomings and review strategy, and on the practice field, implementing game plans that decides the winner long before the game is played. It is the preparation off the field that makes all the difference. It is the melting pot of different players, understanding each person's role and coming together to work as a single unified team that determines the outcome. During my high school years, I was fortunate enough to play on the football team, and the lessons learned in that experience will help me as a physician and throughout life. Discipline, work ethic, leadership skills that I obtained playing football better prepared me for a life of responsibility and dedication to my craft. I'm going to skip to the second paragraph. A football team is composed of a wide array of players, all of whom seek the same goal, unified by those select few who stand out, the players who work harder than anybody else, those who are always the first on the field and the last to leave. These select few often elevate a team from mediocrity to extraordinary through leadership, effort, respect, and compassion toward their teammates and coaches. The same can be said for the medical field. Serving as a leader in organizations at Michigan State University has helped me become a better leader and person as well. As an executive board member of both the Muslim Students Association and the Pre-Medical Association on campus, along with my teammates, in quotes, that is my fellow executive board members, we have worked together and succeeded in achieving goals. As social chair of the Muslim Students Association, I worked with the rest of the executive board to organize dinners, educational seminars, social events, and other activities aimed at increasing awareness on Islamic issues and to aid in promoting diversity on campus, etc. So I'm going to skip down to the last couple of sentences. Such experiences have helped me to grow into a leader and a person others can depend on and trust. As a physician, I expect these qualities will help me in working with my fellow doctors and nurses in order to achieve the goals set out for us the moment we step in the door on the first day of residency, to save lives and maintain health. So you see that the qualities here that are highlighted are the value of teamwork, working hard, having grit. And he also provides this nice and vivid comparison with football. Notice though how the conclusions are drawn for the reader from the very beginning. So the comparison is not just allowed to speak for itself, but the dots are connected for the reader at the end of the first paragraph and at the end of the second paragraph. And also I have to, I have a word of caution here. It could be tricky to make successful comparisons. So for example, if you compare you have to be careful. You have to think of what you're comparing. If you compare doctors to mechanics, car mechanics, that might give the impression that you don't see people as human beings, but you see them as machines. And so that will probably not go very well with the admissions committee. So again, comparisons are, can be very powerful, but they're also kind of tricky. So if you decide to go for a comparison, think carefully what the implications are. Then number 7 by Michael Franco. He has a memorable story, and he has very little personal, very little relevant experience, which is probably okay. Well, it was okay in this case. So I'm going to start reading at the top. It's around 7 o'clock a.m. and the workday begins. Vegetables must be chopped, meat must be butchered, and fish is to be filleted. Suddenly, without warning, it is noon and lunch is upon me. The temperature rises to a stifling, sauna-like level in front of the heavy iron flat-top grills, and commands are being barked into my ear by a French chef who seems to think that the volume of his voice must be 10 times that of the banging pots. In the kitchen of the French restaurant where I worked after leaving culinary school, the intensity level was always high. A delicate balance between speed and finesse was the rule, and sustained efficiency was paramount. The culinary world is still a field I truly enjoy. However, I always knew there would be a point when I would return to the academic arena and pursue my passion in learning, for learning, I'm sorry. So it's a nice story. It's a vivid description. However, it's not just, the description is not just for its own sake. We also learned that this candidate is able to balance speed with finesse. He has attention to detail, and he can handle a variety of tasks at the same time. So this is going to be important later in the personal essay when he brings up his experience as an ER volunteer. And so he sets us up in the beginning by highlighting certain personal qualities that then he's going to bring them up again later when he relates another incident. Next paragraph. Upon returning to college, medical school was not made my official target until relatively late. This decision did not come as an afterthought, nor as a result of procrastination. And this is very important. So he has to account for why he's decided, to go to a medical school so late in life. And is that a whim? Did it just, come? Did just the idea just pop into his head while he was driving, for example? Like, how did he come to that? How did he set that goal for himself? And so he has to give an account of that. So that's important to keep in mind. Let's take a look at number 9. By Rebecca Sharim. Okay, so I chose this example for its vivid description. It's got a great vivid opening and examples of direct coded speech. Never be a doctor if you're going to have any loans to pay back. Don't do this to yourself. Or you'll never have a family if you go to medical school. Or the 2 worst jobs in America belong to the physicians and teachers. Without ever soliciting their advice, physicians noticed my pre-medical volunteer name tag and immediately approached me with words of discouragement. I participated in a volunteer summer internship at St. Mary Hospital in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, following my sophomore year of college, in an effort to gain more experience in the medical field and solidify my lifelong desire to become a physician. Throughout the 8 weeks, I spent mandatory hours in both the emergency room and the operating room, made contacts with physicians in specific areas of interest, and spent time shadowing them. In addition, each of us in the program attended weekly business meetings in which administrators of the hospital and local physicians spoke to us about their particular positions and experiences. Okay, I'm going to skip down to the end of the highlighted part. By the end of the internship, I was ready to begin my junior year and the application process with a newfound confidence in my abilities and chosen path. No longer shocked by the procedures or stresses I witnessed, I was only amazed at the lack of encouragement I received, and these quotes still ring sharply in my ears whenever I envisioned my future. However, instead of discouraging me, the experience only inspired me to pursue my goals further. Very good, vivid detail, and also demonstrates that the applicant understands well the challenges of going to medical school. So she's going into it clear-eyed. Now there's another file in that folder, which is called bad example. We have one bad example of personal essay. Don't do this. Okay. I remember the exact moment I first thought about becoming a doctor. I was driving home from a hockey game during my senior year of high school and had just merged onto the Beltway when the idea simply popped into my head. I don't know where that thought came from and why at that particular moment on that day, because up until then, I'd never given a second thought to being anything other than an engineer. Clearly, this was something worth exploring, so I spent the next couple of nights doing some research. The more I looked into the reasons I should consider becoming a doctor, the more I became intrigued. So Wendy could probably say more about this, but my impression here is that this is a random decision. And at least that's what people are going to think. This is a random decision. This person just, he was preparing to be an engineer. All of a sudden, on a whim, he decides to be a doctor, does research for a couple of days, and voila, you have it. So it's one of those things where you would discourage people from reading with the first paragraph. If you move down to the fourth paragraph, as my college career progressed, I began to discover how many ways medicine was my perfect fit. I always knew I was a workaholic and took a much heavier course load than necessary. When I studied abroad, my classes could only be accepted as pass-fail credits, leaving me for the first time in years with a lot of free time. I realized to my dismay how much I hated having so little work to do, etc. The prospect of late nights on call doesn't faze me, as it's not uncommon for me to stay up all night doing work of school, often not even realizing how late it's become because I'm so focused on the task at hand. Wendy, what would you say here? I'm just, my sense here is that this is not necessarily a quality that you want to highlight as one of your top qualities, workaholism. Although, certainly tenacity, endurance is a quality that you need to, that you may highlight. But again, this doesn't show motivation to become a doctor. Maybe it shows motivation to become a financier or, like top level executive or a tech person, but not necessarily a doctor.
Yeah, I would completely agree. It's kind of if your reason to do it is because you think you can get through it, that's not really going to sustain you for a lifetime caring for people. This person probably maybe can get easily through the preclinical years, but the hard work of caring for people doesn't show up in this essay at all. And it's just sort of the equivalent of that you're a hard worker who's able to, focus and do well in your studies. That's just, one example of excellence that's needed by people going into medicine and dentistry. So I think it falls very short of making a good argument.
Those are the examples I've prepared for today. So I'll turn it over to Tom, we can do a brief exercise and have you start composing your thesis statement for your personal essay. And we also have a heuristic sheet where you could go through different character qualities and start circling the ones that you think are your qualities, and start thinking about which of those you want to highlight in your own essay.
Do you mind if we take a look at the chat before we do that, in case maybe
Not
that's
at
the
all,
best way to
yes.
spend some of the rest of our time? Because Courtney, it looks like you've been busy over there. What would you share with us to focus on?
I have been busy. I've been typing away. Let me see. Oh, here's a great question that I answered, but I would love, Wendy, for you to also answer this for the group. Is you're wondering if the personal statement is a why medicine statement or why am I qualified to get it?
Yes. Is that what you said, Courtney?
So my response was, personal statement should be providing evidence of your readiness through your experience. And this is your why. Schools are going to determine if you're qualified.
Yeah, I think that that's right. Yeah. One of the things that I was noticing, and I don't know if you all were picking up on that too, was that for each one of those examples, and by the way, I'm pretty sure that this was from the Princeton book on essays that worked. Is that where we got those essays from? So I like that resource. It's called the Princeton Guide to Essays That Work. We might be able to find the and medical school essays that made a difference. Right. Okay. And we can maybe put the in the chat. I don't know if you can find that, Becca, and drop it in the chat, but I like that one. But one of the things that I was really picking up on was that they shared a lot of resume information at the very start of each one of those, but the essays themselves mentioned very, very few of the actual experiences, because those students relied upon the fact that that was going to come out in their common application experiences section. So they really, the ones that worked the best, focused in on what they wanted to communicate about their motivation and supported it with the experiences that made sense for their overall narrative. So it wasn't going through their activities so much as it was using their activities to underscore whatever it was that they were trying to communicate. I will say the comparison essay, I so agree with you. I almost never see it done well. I got to be honest. And I thought that person did about as good a job as you can do. And I saw a whole chunk of it where I kind of was bored. I didn't think it was that interesting, but it's a tricky one. And, I think you explained that pretty well. What else, Court?
Something else that I also hear a lot in appointments and drop-ins is like, how do I choose which stories or which events in my life that have motivated me to pursue the health professions? How do I choose which ones to highlight?
Well, I think you gotta really think about authenticity. So, you might be tempted to choose something that you think is going to be impressive, but it has to be authentic. It has to be something that you are excited about and that you invested in, because that's where you're going to have the most to say. So my guidance would be, really try to think about what you feel like you really connect with the most, and don't ever try to figure out what you think they want to hear, because they don't have a plan for that. I don't know if Tom or Sally, if you would add anything to that.
Well, I would just say prioritize. Think about what drew you to the profession to begin with. I mean, why do you really want to become a doctor, and why do you think that you would be a good doctor? what do you have in you that will take you there and sustain you for, as Wendy said, a lifetime of caring for patients and dealing with disease and dealing with people suffering and etc. And then write these things out. And then, I mean, if you are, you know, the lucky person who has a lot of motivational stories, then try to find the story that best illustrates those qualities.
And I mean, if you're really lucky, if any of those also are, you know, great opportunities for you to reflect and show that something it's an experience you're wrestling with, right? If it's an opportunity to show growth or an opportunity for future growth, if any of those particular experiences do that, those might be ideal. But that doesn't mean you should eliminate another one just because they don't.
What else, Court?
That's it so far.
Okay. I saw Kiana curious if that person got in. The book is, wait, are you curious if the person the hockey person or the hockey person did not get in? And all the rest of them did because they're out of that book, Essays That Work. And the hockey person is a former student of mine from many, many years ago who ultimately got in as a reapplicant, but that did not get him there. The bad one, she says. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's just not a particularly successful statement. Maybe it was just the first pass.
Yeah.
There's also one paragraph where he talks about surgeons playing Metallica's Enter Sandman over during surgery. And I mean, yes, I mean, that happens. Physicians don't necessarily want patients to know about that. So it's probably not something to put in the personal essay.
What else is on your mind while we're here? If we have other questions, we'd love to answer them. We might save the activity for next week for the Write Night. But go ahead, and if you have any other questions, either put them in the chat or you're welcome to raise your hand if you want to unmute and ask a question. We'd be happy to do that. Catherine, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi. So I am like working on my personal statement and it's coming along, but like you mentioned earlier, like I think it's going to change a lot between now and May when I'm submitting my primary applications. If we're participating in the committee letter process, is that something we should be worried about if our like personal statement isn't perfect yet for the committee letter process, or no, just like do your best at telling your story and then tweak it as time goes on over like throughout the year?
The latter. So we know that you're going to continue to work on it, and that's kind of the goal, right? So this is you're getting some feedback from us, which honestly you can take or leave, because this is, you know, you're going to run hopefully your essay by a number of people, and you're going to, you know, if we say I wouldn't include that, but it's something that's really important to your story, then that's what you should do. I mean, this is your story. So you're going to be continuing to work on it. And also, you know, we're starting to read packets right now. We have just under 50 packets in, and the deadline is the 15th. We're going to get hundreds more between now and then. So there's going to be a point at which we're going to have a huge stockpile of them. And if your personal statement changes significantly from when you turn it in and you haven't gotten your feedback yet from an advisor, feel free to upload your updated version, because I know Courtney feels the same way that I do. I would much prefer to read what you think is an approximation of where you're at with your statement than something that you left behind a long time ago, because that's a waste of time for all of us. So yeah, you're going to keep working on it, and that is expected. But once we give you feedback, then we give you feedback. So it's a little bit of Russian roulette. If you get the feedback before you send us the update, then you got the feedback on the one that you turned in. I see Dominic and then Daniel. So Dominic, what's your question?
Hi, I was hoping you guys could, or I guess you specifically could touch a little more on the aspect of like, yes, if we have an activity in our activity section, we're still able to talk about it in our personal statement, but we just have to elaborate in a different way. My question, like specifically, would be is if we're doing that, would we just talk about more of like a specific instance of like and then maybe if we shadowed a doctor, like a certain like specific moment that or interaction or event or something that happened in that experience with them to highlight a certain attribute that you may have gained or to relay something about yourself since you're not like so you're not like retelling like I learned how to view x-rays etc like in the shadowing is that kind of what you guys mean?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but also, I don't know if you really ever want to spend a lot of time doing exactly what you just described. So I was a shadow with a radiologist. If what you come up with is I learned how to read x-rays, that won't, that's not, I mean, everybody knows
Yeah.
that that would be what you would be doing there, right? So you don't tell them very much. So you want to focus a little bit more on what surprised you about radiology. Are they more, some of us might think that radiologists don't interact with patients. Did you find that they did? So you're gonna, if you don't want to stop short with your descriptions of your activities on what you did. Everybody knows what a scribe does. Everybody knows what an EMT does. So what did you learn from the experience? What surprised you about it? What were the unique parts of it as opposed to a description of it? And then I would take that a little bit further. I think that actually we presented some really, really good examples of how the focus is on the attribute development through the experiences and not the experiences themselves. Does that
All right.
help?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Okay. Daniel.
Hi, yeah. I just had a question and also just like hearing from like some of my friends who've applied in the past, like kind of like the medical school application process, it's really hard to like be authentic through it. And I asked in the chat, so Courtney, I'm sorry. It was kind of the idea of one of the examples we were talking about, where it's like if you want to really show like one aspect of your character trait, I think the example was like being a hard worker or a workaholic. But there's like that potential of that part of you being like misconstrued for something negative. Is it worth like writing it in, or do you think a good rule of thumb is just kind of steer clear of that, just not to be misunderstood?
Do either of you want to tackle that? I have some thoughts, but I don't
I
know.
also have a thought.
Okay, you go ahead. Gordon.
You're going to have a lot of different people reading your application. And what I interpret as a really wonderful character trait, Wendy might think that it's a really awful character trait. And so just be aware that, remember who your audience is, but be aware that there are going to be varying levels of individuals looking and interpreting your personal statement. And so really being able to take a step back and saying, okay, if I was a staff member, if I was an admissions director, if I was a residency director, if I'm the chair, how would I interpret this? And if you're finding that the balance is tipping a little bit more in your favor, then I think that you could feel secure including it. And if it's tipping a little bit more in the muddy waters, I think that that's something where you can kind of wordsmith and craft some language differently to still get the same point across, but that we perhaps aren't using the terms workaholic.
Yep, I think I agree. Thank you, Courtney, for stepping in and saying so well what was floating around in my head. Leora.
Hi. So I think that this like has been talked about, but I just wanted to like, I guess like re-clarify. So when I was reading like what they describe as like your personal statement, like personal experiences, and then looking at some of the examples, like people talked about things that other people told them and they reflected on that. So I guess where is the line between like telling somebody else's story versus like telling yours? In the case of like you might have, you know, experienced something with somebody else, but the more of the focus was on them, but it taught you a lot. Is that still acceptable? Or I don't know how to like explain it without giving a specific example, but yes, that's my question.
What's your instinct?
I mean, my instinct is to say that it still is like impactful. Like for me, I have like a specific story in mind that involves like a friend and like an early experience in my life. And I feel like that impacted my like drive, I guess, to like care for people. But it's like, I guess, hard to know how to like frame it in a way that's like talking about what you learned rather than like what was going on with them.
Well, I think that's the challenge, because I do think what you want to do is move very quickly. Otherwise, what can happen is that can become a lengthy anecdote that gets generic, even though you know it's not generic, like it's not generic to you and this is a real person. But when you're telling somebody else's story and spending a lot of time on the story, you're losing the opportunity to share what you learned and what was meaningful to you about that experience. So that's my 10,000 foot take on it. And my 5 foot take on it is that sometimes that I've seen those stories be sort of like, you know, helping somebody through a crisis or something like that. And I don't know if that always works in talking about the qualities and characteristics of physicians, unless particularly you're thinking in terms of maybe psychotherapy or something like that. So I guess I mean, without seeing your essay, I don't know, but I'm taking a guess based on many years of experience. And I think sometimes I don't know if those work as well as you might hope. What do you think? You're Vessel, you're kind of just like nodding. So I'm wondering if you have an instinct there.
Well, I would ask the question, how does the story help the admissions committee learn something about me? And so if it does, for example, if it highlights your desire to help, if it highlights your willingness to learn and openness to being taught, then, you know, by all means, you know, include the story. However, you do have to connect the dots for your audience. They're not going to necessarily draw that conclusion on their own.
Thank you guys.
Adidea?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for doing this. My quick question is about concluding the personal statement. This is kind of what I've been struggling on for the past 2 months. So my struggle is more like trying to conclude and not come as trying to sell yourself. In a case where one of my thoughts is maybe one way I can write my conclusion would be to draw back on the motivation or like the seed of my personal statement. But one feedback I got from someone that read my personal statement was drawing back on the seed wouldn't really make much of a conclusion. And I'm kind of wondering if there are ideas or ways to conclude a personal statement and conclude strongly.
Tom or Vessel, you want to take that one?
Wendy, you've read more of these than I have.
So essentially, you're trying to figure out how to summarize at your final conclusion, how much of the motivation you should be concluding with.
Right, without, you know, selling yourself and without just clearly stating that, oh, I'm this good and or this are my qualities and this is why I want to be a doctor or something.
I guess I feel like that really is the essence of showing and not telling. You know, it is for them to conclude whether or not they think that you have the qualities that you say that you have and that you've incorporated into your motivation story are the qualities that they're looking for in an applicant and in a physician. I thought that we said well before, reflect on the physicians that or dentists that you've had. You know, who do you, what allows you to develop trust? You know, is it competence? Is it kindness? Is it expertise? Is it an ability to bring in your whole circle of, you know, family members or people who are invested? I mean, I guess, you know, you really have to think about what qualities you've shared and let them speak for themselves. I don't think your concluding paragraph needs to summarize what hopefully you've shown throughout your essay. And if you do, I think that will come across as a little simplistic. So if you've done a good job throughout your essay of showing what you think are the important qualities and tying them to experiences that have let you test them, then I think you're there. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you so much.
Well, here's an example from Christina Ahn's essay. So at the end, she says, there was a lot of work to be done, but knowing that I was helping even in such a small capacity gave me endless amounts of energy. And then I knew I wanted to help others in need and had to be in a profession that I could be passionate about. So she kind of strikes the right amount, the right balance between humility and eagerness to, and, you know, openness and desire to learn, if that makes sense. That's one way to end it.
Mm-hmm. Brianna?
Yes. I actually forgot to put my hand down because Courtney actually kind of answered my question, but my question was specific to me just trying to follow along with using chronological order in a way that doesn't confuse my reader, because I have 3 years worth of health experience where I've been working, but I have volunteer experience that was from years ago, so prior to my work experience, that I also wanted to draw on. And I just wasn't sure if kind of jumping back and forth would be a little bit too much, or I'm really just struggling with finding the right words.
I would advise presenting your experiences in a chronological order, unless you're a really, really skilled writer. Because it's, I mean, for people who have lots and lots of applications to read, they're probably not going to have the time to, or the patience to, you know, put the details together if they're not presented in an easy to follow order. So, I mean, are you, Brianna, do you have, is the question about experiences that are far in the past, from long ago, and then you have more recent experiences and you're thinking that there's a gap in between? Or, because I mean, I don't know, Wendy, what would you say? Like, I wouldn't care personally if how spaced out these experiences are.
Yeah, I agree. Unless it's, you know, so I think with the chef, you know, they had a complete career change. And I think it was relevant, like you pointed out, to describe that and why they're now on this path. But I think in general, what I would think maybe a starting point for you, if you have lots of experience over a lot of years, Brianna, is maybe to start with trying to figure out what it is that you want to broadly say about what you learned from being involved with any of those experiences. Kind of make a list of like, what were the big standouts for you? And then use the specific experiences as relevant. So, you know, was a standout that I mean, I'm not sure what your motivation story is, but maybe your motivation story is patients who, you know, is communication or something, and how challenging it can be for patients when they are not able to, you know, seek healthcare from somebody who speaks their language. And then maybe your various experiences show where that was done well and where maybe, you know, where there was a lack of communication, you know, that led to problems with the you know, patient understanding, or with hesitancy to share details or something like that. So this way, you know, maybe you have 5 experiences, but your big story is on communication, and you bring in the relevant pieces that support your story, or say how that could be hard. So that's probably what rather than getting into a situation where you're just going through your resume by date and what the experience was, think about what it is you want to communicate overall about all the experiences, and then pull in the relevant details. Courtney, would you add anything to that?
Nope, that was spot on.
Okay.
I can
perfect.
just build on it a little too. I mean, I was going to
Yeah,
suggest something very similar, but finding that commonality, right? And then maybe introduce the more recent experience to place us kind of in the story, and then kind of refer back to, this was something I learned firsthand in an earlier volunteer experience, and spend a little time there, and then if appropriate, move back into the more recent experience. But finding, yeah, that thread that connects them, so that you're speaking about the broader experience or the quality that you want to address, and not I wouldn't recommend bouncing around to too many different experiences, because the reader could get lost there.
And you know, avoid the temptation to feel like you have to mention them all, because don't forget, they're all going to be in your activities section. So just the relevant ones to this particular story.
Wendy, I'm going to add something on to that statement. I've been using this really wonderful analogies. I love analogies. And I've been saying that your application is like an onion, because I think about like Shrek, because I recently watched it with one of my nieces, and it's one of the greatest lines of Shrek is, you know, ogres are like onions, they have layers. And so I've been saying that all the time these days, because I don't want students to feel pressured to include all of those details in the personal statement, or even all of those details in the activities section. There are going to be opportunities where you are revealing information to schools, we're revealing information to schools. So think about how and when you're sharing information to schools, and how you're building upon that information that you've shared. So if you tell them something in your personal statement, that's one of the first things they're going to read, followed by their secondaries. Are you building upon the foundation that you've built in your personal statement and in your primaries, in your secondaries? Think about what we're going to be sharing in a committee letter. You don't need to repeat those things. And so think a little bit more strategically about what information is being shared, and at what point in the application process you're sharing it.
Let's,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we have, I see 2 more hands, and then it's getting toward the end of our time. So let's take question from Sophia, and then from Kiana, and then we will say goodnight. So go ahead, Sophia.
Hi. My question was about the content of my personal statement. So I've kind of like started formulating it in my head. Except I'm wondering whether there are certain experiences that I can't share because they're sensitive. I'm wondering like how how sensitive or how sorry, I can't phrase what I'm trying to say, but I don't want to say something sensitive in the personal statement. What, like, for example, an old relationship I had, would that be something bad to include? Because it made me more resilient, in my opinion. And it was a big part of my life and the things that happened in my life. But would that be something I should exclude from the personal statement because that's too sensitive, or I don't know.
I have a couple of reactions. When I was taking my oldest daughter on tours of undergraduate institutions, one of the pieces of advice at Kenyon College was to avoid the 4 Ds. I wish I could remember what all 4 were, but there was like divorce, disease, drugs, and like it was like horses, if there's like a D that starts with the horses, and I don't remember. But anyway, I think that the point was to try not to, overshare. And I will add to that like I think related to your personal statement, you want to think about why you're including anything that you choose to include. If what you're trying to indicate is that you're resilient, that you overcame something, is that relevant to some part of your medicine story other than just demonstrating resilience? And if it is, then I would always say, and you want to include something like that, figure out why you're telling it, figure out how to tell it so it makes sense to the overall story of why medicine that you're sharing. And don't stay with it so long that schools wonder if you have a huge issue that is unresolved, that you are really struggling with. So my instinct is probably, I don't know that I would have you share it, but if you feel like it fits, put it in there and let Courtney or me give you feedback on it. And if we're like, yeah, I didn't get it, we'll tell you. We're pretty honest. We'll say things like, cut all this and start with the 3rd paragraph. We'll say, I would like to suggest a different approach, which means take the whole thing and throw it in the shredder. We'll say, what else, Courtney? What are some of our other euphemisms?
One that I use pretty regularly is, let's go back to the drawing board, or let's re-strategize, or let's wordsmith this some more. That is my proxy of scrap it and let's start over.
Yeah, you want to make your mistakes with us, so that you don't make them with the professional schools. So if you want to try something, try it. And we can give you feedback. I think that's the best way for me to answer that. Does that help?
Perfect. I will do that for sure. Thank you.
Kiana?
Hi, I had a question in the chat that Courtney answered, but in your answer, Courtney, you mentioned both a most meaningful activity and a most meaningful experience. So I was wondering if you could please elaborate on that, the differences between the two, and if there are going to be different questions on our applications for meaningful experience versus meaningful activity.
Kiana, those are exactly the same things. Those are languages and words that we just kind of use interchangeably. But for your AMCAS application, or for anyone who's applying through AMCAS, so to allopathic medical schools, you're going to have to identify your 3 most meaningful activities. That's how they word it, meaningful activities. So I will be consistent with my language as well. You're going to have certainly some more character space for those other activities. You're going to have 700 characters. For your most meaningful, I believe it's 1275 characters. You'll have a little bit more room to take a deeper dive and be more reflective. But your 3 most meaningfuls, when schools pull up your application, those are the 3 that they see first. So think about which ones you're choosing, why you've chosen those, and how much time and energy and effort you've invested into those experiences. I think it would be really difficult for a school to believe that a most meaningful activity is something that you started a month ago. So think about what those 3 most meaningful activities are. This is something that you all can really start to think about after you've submitted your pre-health packet. That's when I'm going to tell you, start drafting those 15 activities and pull out those 3 most meaningfuls.
Okay, thank you so much, Courtney.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you so much to our Writing Center colleagues for helping walk us through this tonight. I hope this was helpful. And I know that you'll all have a really good follow-up, those of you who are able to come next Wednesday to the Write Night. And I'll see some of you on Friday for the first navigating workshop. And thanks for your great questions, your time and attention, and we look forward to reading your essays. Have a good night.